We had just finished Rumor Weed, and I was very overtly trying to build the studio towards doing Jonah already. In fact, I had wanted to roll in Jonah right out of Rumor Weed, and we weren't ready, so we had to wait another year. On King George and the Ducky, we intentionally tried to make it very simple from a story point of view, with just a few locations, so that we could then really concentrate on those locations. So if you look at the locations, they're by far the most detailed, beautiful locations, modeling and lighting that we had ever done up to that point. We did something that we've never done before or since, and that is retell a Bible story that we can't let on that we're retelling. Because it's the story of David and Bathsheba, which, as you know, is not exactly a G-rated story. But it's a powerful story. It's an immensely powerful story at the end, where King David is confronted by the prophet Nathan, about his sin, about, look what you did. And Nathan sets it up amazingly, not by telling him directly, you did this and this was wrong, but by telling him a story. He comes in and tells him the story of a man with a sheep, and a poor man with one sheep and a rich man with many sheep, who took the poor man's one sheep to serve for dinner to some guests. And it just infuriates King David. And then there's just this, one of the strongest moments, I think, in the Old Testament, where he says, "You're that man." And so we wanted to tell that story because it's a powerful example of selfishness and pride. And but obviously it's like a PG-13 film, maybe, depending how you shoot it, maybe R. So we had to come up with a completely different context for telling the story. And someone had written in with the idea of, why don't you do this, as King David and the Ducky?
It was just a really great concept. What if we paralleled the story of David and Bathsheba, with a topic, that's not really suitable for kids, but with a theme about not being selfish that is really great for kids.
We took it out of biblical times, put it in medieval times, made it King George, just made it kind of a classic fairy tale setting, and it became very interesting to watch people watch it and try to see when they picked up, or if they picked up, on the fact that we were retelling the story of David and Bathsheba with rubber ducks.
King George was our first production on new software, on Maya. It was an interesting transition because we also had just moved as a company. So we moved, we had hired a good number of people, and we had a brand new software we were all learning to work with.
It was a really exciting time because the company was growing. We were moving into this new space, and King George sort of came in the middle of that. It happened really fast too. I remember, we didn't have time to do, the standard concept that we normally do with the show. So all the concept work was given to the modelers. And the modelers loved it because they, got to go in and invent everything themselves. And then the storyboarding was done by Todd Carter. Just one guy boarded the whole thing, and it was actually his first assignment at Big Idea.
King George and the Ducky was a fun show to do. We had just finished Larry Boy and the Rumor Weed a couple months before that. Big show, big score, fairly big orchestra, and it was fun to come back to a more intimate setting. It's kind of a nostalgic VeggieTales feel. A smaller orchestra, smaller music, but a lot of fun stuff in there. We used a lot of in-house musicians. Adam, our audio engineer, plays French horn and percussion. We got him involved. Shar Jackson was playing cello. Heather Finch was playing violin. And it's fun to use what you've got and use that as your palette and say, okay, here's the challenge, here's the framework, what can we do with this?
I thought it would be really fun to have, Larry, doing this tango with a manatee. But that I combined that with an idea that I had years and years ago about Larry, watching different types of things on TV that he shouldn't be watching, basically. And so one of the things that he was watching was a endangered species cooking show. And so I started writing it originally as albino manatee. And they're a curious mammalian sensation with a, here, let me think about this. They're an aquatic mammalian sensation with a curious lack of pigmentation. First you scoop them from the river, then to serve them up for dinner, you just sing this little song for me. So that wasn't going to work because that was a little bit too off the edge. And so, but I still thought this idea of Larry, watching a soap opera, might work. So he's just watching this completely ridiculous soap opera, just a total waste of time.
Mike, he has no problem with getting up and acting his things out, which a good director should. And I remember we were having a studio meeting, and one part of the studio meeting was to talk about the project coming up, which was King George and the Ducky. And then Mike got up and presented the next silly song, which was Endangered Love.
I remember when I first pitched that idea to the animators, I brought my daughter has a big stuffed polar bear, and I'm walking, on the streets of Chicago, and I'm passing this construction site. Just me and a big fluffy teddy bear, and I got a couple of cat calls from construction workers.
And he got up in front of everybody, and he had a little tape with some, rough music worked out, and literally acted out and did his dancing and what he thought maybe tango would look like, and sang, and then would play the tape recorder, and just the whole antics of him up there doing this, and he was being very serious about it, while everybody in the room was just cracking up, watching him dance with a stuffed polar bear. And we knew right away this is going to be a great silly song.
Obviously, the humor is not in the music itself, it's in the words, it's in the story, and I leave that up to Mike. So if I can bring a legitimacy to the background music, I believe that's going to make the comedy that much more humorous. So we wrote a legitimate tango, and that was a real challenge. It took a while, but it was very rewarding. We used a friend of mine, Roddy Chong, who actually plays violin. You've probably seen him on TV. He's toured with Shania Twain and Celine Dion and DC Talk and Jars of Clay, and brought him in, and he played the violin parts on it. So it was a fun connection to make there, to bring him in and play on that.
Tom Danon and I animated Endangered Love. Mike brought in a tape of some tango dancing, and it's just a lot of shoulders and kind of whipping your head around, and those very sultry kind of looks, but that's about it. I mean, you don't have any arms or legs to mess with, so you let his cucumber body do all the dancing, all the talking. There's one moment where Larry's dancing with the manatee, and he goes to dip her, and he leans a little too far and falls down out of the shot. And Mark Volcano and I were going around about the best way to act this one out. And he said, well, just think about Clouseau, the way he falls out of the camera, and then they added a little shake to it to give it a little more realism, and then he just pops back up and kind of looks around like, hey, anybody see that? Okay, keeps on dancing. That's my favorite shot.
That was one of the videos where we started working more with the thinking character, and having the pupils just move a little bit, or just kind of shift, if you will, ever so slightly, just over a frame or two, which would show the audience's character's thinking. And we started doing that a little bit more at that point, and definitely started pushing that more and more as we got on into the other videos. And it's something I really wanted to see happen a lot when we got into Jonah.
Well, I didn't learn about this till it was already printed and out the door and everything, but the production manager pointed out that one of the scenes they animated was King George, where he's standing in front of the portrait of his dad. And in the previous shot, he had just changed out of his towel into his royal robe, and then he hops off the screen and hops into the next shot, and he's still wearing his towel. So, I take the hit for that one. And then, he hops off the screen and he's back in his robe. So, just a little something to watch for. It's way down near the bottom of the screen, so it's not that big a deal.
One of the reasons we wanted to retell the story of Esther is that we were getting more and more letters saying, hey, how about a girl? A lot of guys going on here, can't you give my daughter a really good vegetable role model?
Originally, we wanted to do a story with a female heroine from the Bible. And so, Esther and Ruth were, jumped to the front of the pack. And I started researching both of those stories, and landed on Esther just because it just was such a great story about courage. The whole flow of the story was just very cinematic. I mean, it just had a great storyline and a great ending. I kind of landed on the idea of telling it as a sort of a Prohibition era type of story, sort of a Godfather-esque kind of thing, and even some of the scenery, like when you go into the king's chamber, you look behind him and you see the horizontal blinds, kind of arranged in the same way that the Godfather's blinds were, in the original Godfather movie. But just sort of getting that gangster feel to the film, and just having fun with that.
With Esther, we really were going for a cinematic feel. We were trying to make kind of a mini feature film.
Esther was a big step for us because we knew we eventually wanted to get into movies. And to do a movie, we wanted to produce a more legitimate story, a deeper, broader story, and see if we could pull it off.
The character development, was a little bit richer than we had done before. The sets were a little bit more elaborate. The music was more elaborate. And so we wanted to take a step toward making a film.
We wanted to see how can we push our camera work, how can we push our lighting, to have the confidence to go into Jonah and know that we can pull that off.
Esther was a challenge in regards to we wanted to go a little bit more on the serious side, a little more dramatic, and we wanted to introduce a new character. It was fun because we worked with a character that we tried to develop a little bit more reality into her hair, even though it was a challenge technically, and to develop a little bit different facial features for her character. And we went round and round in what we could do in regards to the kind of vegetable that we should use and how we should change her movements. And she was a real challenge in a lot of ways.
When we were designing Esther, we went from kind of just a plain girl to like this beautiful Hollywood starlet. We can't use that. Who's going to relate to that? We want someone that everybody can relate to. And my daughter, Sarah, posed for me at home. I just noticed how the hair would always fall on her face. I said, that's very interesting. So I started to draw this, and I said, honey, just sit right there. I want to draw you because I'm designing Esther. So she sat there. She's moving her hair back and forth. So I'm sketching. Okay, Dad, let me see. So I finally show it to her. She goes, that doesn't look like me. That's a vegetable. But it had all those elements of her in there. And taking those little elements from life, from a real child, and bringing them into the story just makes it so much more believable. But it was a nightmare on the animators because, are you sure you want to have that hair go over her high? And the lighting kept having shadows over the face that we didn't want.
We wanted her to look special. We wanted her to look charming. We didn't want to just take another pickle and put eyelashes on it. And we wanted her to look attractive as much as we could and be engaging for little girls.
So it was a headache, it was a nightmare, but it looked beautiful when it was all done.
For there is nothing we can't face when God is at our side.
As I look back, it's kind of interesting thematically to look at what we chose to address in conjunction with what we were going through at the time. For instance, we chose Where's God When I'm Scared for the first video, which I think is very appropriate as we're starting out on this big adventure, terrified. And then, a couple videos later, as the little guys can do big things too. And I know as we had a few videos out there after a while, and Phil's dream kept getting bigger about how he wanted to help the world and impact culture, I'm sure he felt a little small in proportion, and then out comes that song. And Esther, The Battle Is Not Ours, that song, is really, even still to this day, very, very meaningful. The words of the battle is not ours, we look to God above, for he will guide us safely through and guard us with his love. I will not be afraid, I will not run and hide, for there's nothing I can't face when God is at my side. And that was a time, I believe, in Big Ideas history where we had grown. We were a different kind of company than when we started and we were 3 guys in an office. I think that came out of how he was feeling at the time, and it was just I think he wrote it for himself, and then the rest of the world, we got to benefit a little by it.
No, there is nothing I can't face when God is at my side.
The Battle Is Not Ours was a very powerful song for me to work with. It had a very haunting melody, and I wanted to pull as much out of that song as I could. It was a fun challenge and a very powerful song to be able to
work with.
And it really affected me. I mean, just the lesson of that story, researching it, you know, and you know, turning it into a VeggieTales story, you know, it really impacted my life. It's just because it's such a powerful, powerful story.
Every video is kind of an attempt to try something different. And with Esther, it was, let's see if we can capture that kind of classic Disney, you know, heroine feel. So we were wrestling through this story, and it was interesting because I feel like we really did capture that classic Disney feel, but when you put a vegetable in the lead role, it's kind of unusual. We got positive mail saying, you know, I love this. It reminds me of a Disney movie. And we got negative mail saying, I didn't like this at all. It reminds me of a Disney movie.
Haman wanted to wipe out the entire Jewish race, and so you know, we basically paralleled that into, you know, sending everybody off into banishment on an island where, you know, they'd be horribly tickled. And actually for me, that was a childhood fear of mine. I actually brought that out of my own childhood because I remember being a kid, I would always think of, wouldn't it be terrible just to be tickled and never stop? You know, somebody would just tickle you and not stop. And so, a bit of my own stuff coming out there.
Oh, cue cards? Okay. Phil is a genius. He taught me everything I know. What? Hey, do I have to read this?
Oh, you're really in for a treat.
Fireplace! The fireplace! The chair! The chair! The wardrobe! Ambiance! Ambiance!
Before I sat down to write Lyle, we had just finished Esther, and I wrote a bunch of songs for Esther, and I was worried that all my songs were going to start sounding the same if I just kept writing more and more songs. So I needed new musical influence. So I went to a record store and ended up buying Gilbert and Sullivan's The Pirates of Penzance. I thought, okay, I'm going to listen to this over and over again and fill my head with how Gilbert and Sullivan write music and then try to write songs like that. And so I listened to it about 100 times and thought, okay, oh, not only am I going to write songs like Gilbert and Sullivan, I want to write a musical, a whole musical, not a short, you know, 15-minute musical, but a whole musical. And so I sat down and thought, okay, can't do pirates because then it'll be too obvious that I'm paying tribute to the Pirates of Penzance. So I thought, okay, how about Vikings? They're very pirate-like.
We're Vikings! What do you know? The terrors of the sea. We're Vikings! Wherever they go, pillaging happily. We're Vikings! Let it be known, and the Vikings, 'cause who doesn't like a pirate loot? This is my life as a Viking wife. Some golden jewels and a shiny suit. We're actually living is rife with strife. And a giant screen TV to boot. But that's the lot we got. We're marrying you. The terrors of the sea. We marry Vikings. That's the life for me.
For Lyle, what I wanted to do was to capture the look and feel of a lot of the musicals that were done during the 40s and 50s. You know, those Technicolor musicals that were very hyper-real and very vivid, shot on the soundstage. And the artist here just pulled together and I think went beyond themselves to get that very miniature yet hyper-real looking set for the characters to act on. I think it's beautiful. They did a great job.
Hi, Sven. Hi, Otar.
I thought Junior would make a good Lyle because he had just the right amount of innocence. And we hadn't used him in a while, and everybody loves Junior, and we're getting letters, you know, more Junior, we want more Junior. But putting that kind of childlike innocence into the key character always works. And since it was a musical, and Junior's great at songs, it was natural.
What's the use? A golden goose is no excuse for being mean. When I share, I get my share of friends.
My favorite part of Lyle has to be the part where Junior actually sings the little doot-doot-doot-doots between the verse of the song because it wasn't part of the original lyric. Phil came in after writing the show and read through the script for us and was humming all the music to us and did the doot-doot-doot-doots between the verses, and one of our animators came up later and said, wouldn't it be funny if that was actually sung?
I think my favorite part about Lyle is just the silliness of the story itself, in that you've got all these Vikings that are doing their Viking things, pillaging and plundering and, you know, taking giant screen TVs. And at the same time, there's a little Viking that's staying home making potholders.
Potholders.
Potholders!
You want one?
Hey, it's the thought that counts.
Casting for Omelette was a lot of fun. I mean, we have our repertoire of characters, but as you've noticed, we're a little shy on the female characters to play parts. So when the role came up for Ophelia in Omelette, we were a little bit of a loss to figure out who was going to do that till Phil suggested Mr. Lot, and it was questionable at first, but he assured us that's tradition. That's the way Shakespeare is done.
Oh, my troubled prince! I beseech and implore thee, please share your eggs with the people.
Omelette learns to share. The Vikings have to learn to share. But Bob also learns to share his show. You see, Omelette and the Vikings show us the good side of sharing. Bob shows us you have to share even when it's not real fun.
Oh, we're over here by QWERTY to talk about what we learned today.
Well, this is a show where Archibald Asparagus gets to take over. And Archie's one of my favorites. He's kind of my John Cleese tribute. And it was about 5 years ago, actually, after maybe the second show, that I wrote down an idea. Okay, Archibald should take over a show, and he should try to do like Masterpiece Theater, or a reading of Webster's Dictionary, or something, just insanely high culture but dull.
You'll be glad to know, folks, that we have saved the best for last. It has long been rumored that Gilbert and Sullivan, the brilliant musical duo responsible for classics like HMS Pinafore, The Mikado, and The Pirates of Penzance, penned one last musical before their deaths. This musical, legend has it, was lost before it could be staged. Well, if my cohorts Philippe and Jean-Claude are correct, we have that lost musical.
Archie is a lot of fun to work with, and mostly because he's very uptight. And uptight people are real fun to poke fun of on stage and on camera, because anytime something starts going wrong and mistakes start happening, that's when, and when mistakes start happening and somebody uptight starts, could you get the camera up? Thanks. Okay, phew, somebody's asleep at the wheel there, sorry. Anyway, when mistakes...
Bob, don't look. Just roll the credits, Larry. Roll the credits.
The songs we chose were primarily because we just loved the performances. They came out, we've done probably 60, 70 songs now for sing-along albums. And so we went through all of those, said which ones are the funniest performances, just the most fun, or would be visually the most interesting to look at.
I got a mule, her name is Sal. 15 years on the Erie Canal.
So songs like There's a Hole in the Bottom of the Sea, done by the French Peas, which just turned out hilarious. Or Larry singing You Are My Sunshine, which is the sweetest little thing. And then, Pa Grape on Zacchaeus. And Junior, actually, my wife Lisa wrote a song for Junior for his bedtime album that is just gorgeous.
Your love was with me all throughout my day.
I want to be more like Junior in my faith. He's so childlike and so trusting, and he's so okay with himself. And I thought, how would he get into bed? How would he approach this ritual of ending his day? And just thought, he'd just want to tell God all about it. He just want to tell him everything that happened. And of course, because, he wants to be a good boy, he'll start with some good things I did. And I went to school, and I remembered to make my bed, and he just sort of revel in how God loves him and was with him throughout the day. And then I could almost just see him go, okay, now I'm going to come clean. I'm going to tell him all the other stuff too, because he's God and he loves me. And so then he would just go on forward and say, here's the things that I kind of struggled with today, and come back to the fact that it doesn't matter, God is with him throughout the day. And I really struggled with the melody. The only thing I could come up with when I began to write it was that intro of, I just heard it. It was, in my bed I start to pray and tell God all about my day. And then I had nothing for a very long time. And so kind of down to the wire, I think it was the weekend before recording, I finally sat down and said, okay, this has to happen. And the words came and the melody came. And I ended up calling Chris, the producer, and said, I've got the song. And he's like, it's a little late. I'm coming on Monday to record. And I don't remember how we did it all, but we managed it and were able to record it. And it's just how I want to live my life of faith, is like my day.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray.
3 of our artists are doing 2 songs each. Keith Lango is doing Hole in the Bottom of the Sea and Zacchaeus.
Well, the Hole in the Bottom of the Sea is where Jean-Claude and Philippe go through this almost insanely repetitive song. And there's a bit of a challenge in that. I mean, I could tell you from their perspective or from my perspective. From their perspective, just think of it as 2 French peas going around trying to do an avant-garde photograph art show. It's like a performance art for them. I thought that would be a very French thing to do, you know. From my perspective, I had a lot of fun going around pretending to be a French pea, shooting photographs of things that kind of do or do not make sense with the words. And so towards the end, I was just having fun taking pictures of anything. But some of the funnier pictures I like are the pictures of, like, you know, some of my kids or, you know, somebody else here in the studio.
Here we go.
Zacchaeus is another one that we tried to do a lot with a little. We had to look at it and go a little more MacGyver. It's a song that has 3 verses. The 3 or 4 verses pretty much repeat themselves. So trying to be original with that is kind of interesting.
We also have Christopher Hickman, and he is doing My Day, which is one of my favorites, and he's also doing Erie Canal. And Joe McFadden is doing You Are My Sunshine, which is just really a cute, fantastic song. And he's also doing Modern Major General. That's a mouthful.
Oh, splendid! Lovely! Oh, thank you! I'm done.
Binky was something that was done, I believe, in 1998 and has been sitting in the Big Idea archives, and it was an animation test that was done a long time ago, and it's Binky the opera singing aardvark.
And so Mike and I had to sit down and say, okay, we're going to get these 6 songs, and we have to somehow weave them together into a context. So Mike and I came up with the context that this was Larry's attempt to show Bob what entertainment would be like in the future. If you can imagine, you know, the World's Fairs of the past, or a trip to Tomorrowland at, you know, Disneyland back in the 60s, what it looked like, and just that incredible optimism about in the future, everything will be automatic. And so entertainment is going to be automatic in the future, and this video is just to give people a taste for what entertainment will be like in the future.
It was an idea I originally came up with probably about 4 years ago. Took probably about 7 months of my own time. I work on it after work and stuff like that. Went through and tried a couple of different things and made the character of the blue guy. He's a guy I made probably early on in the whole process to try and learn this new piece of software, and it worked out pretty well. The dog was a bit of a challenge. He was kind of interesting. I tried about 3 or 4 different dogs, and I finally settled on that one because I thought he was the cutest one. And then just pretty much storyboarded it, went in, animated and built the whole thing myself. Tried to really focus on being stylized with it and be more artistic. You know, I'm not trying to impress anybody with how 3D it is. You know, I wasn't trying to pull off a Shrek or a Bug's Life or anything like that. I just figured we'll just go for a real simple artistic style that's easy to execute but still has some fun to it, and so that's what we did. For the first 2 years that I had this short film, I just went with what I had, which was the temp track, and it was an adaptation of The Flight of the Bumblebee in a kind of fast, jazzy sort of way, and it was all right, but there were certain parts of it I said, well, I always wanted to, you know, a custom bit of music written for it. I mean, it worked out fairly well, but working with Kurt in the last couple of days, that's been fun because now I'm starting, you know, it's starting to take on a personality of its own. It's different than what I had imagined when I first started playing around with some ideas with this other musician I was talking with. We were thinking about going with a mambo style, something really upbeat and fun and really jazzy, lots of big brass and stuff like that. And what we're going with here is a little more laid back, a little more Charlie Brown, but it's got a nice groove to it, so we're having fun. Every short film I make, I'm working on my 6th one now. I try and make sure that there's some element of truth there that I always try to bring out. And sometimes it's right on the nose, and sometimes it's a little more subtle and under the hood. But I still want to try and be true to who I am and true to what I believe, and make sure that the stuff that I make has some impact in that way. And whether it's fun or whether it's serious, whether it makes you cry or laugh, as long as it's true, I'm pretty cool with it.
The Binky the Opera Singer short was done as a R&D project when we were looking into other software packages. Probably, when was it, 97? Around then. So we designed and built and rigged and animated everything and lit everything over a pretty short period of time, just a few weeks. When the project first started, we were just kind of shooting around ideas, and our original idea was to have a group of cartoon characters from all different genres of animation together for like a screen test, and we'd put together sketches of Binky, which was kind of a, I don't know if you remember, the show was Angry Beavers. It's just kind of a stylized cartoon years ago. We had that character. We designed sort of the Papa Bear from the old Warner Brothers Three Bears cartoons, who just, you know, walked around grumbling. We had a sock monkey, supposed to be sort of the Toy Story representative. Had a little paper cutout elephant wearing a stocking cap, kind of a South Park guy. But yeah, a lot of fun. Oh, and a claymation sort of Aardman animation rabbit that was there with the big wide mouth and the kind of buck teeth. And we'd even gone so far as to try to develop the way the fingerprints are left on the surface of the clay as they're animating it. It just kind of gives that little, you know, Ripley effect to the clay. So, you know, we had all these pretty grandiose ideas and had to whittle it down to just Binky singing his song.
I'm done.
For the desk, for instance, we've got Rusty and Ventrilomatic sitting behind it. And we went back and forth about, you know, almost having a two-level type of a desk so that, you know, one robot that sits shorter can be here and the taller robot could be here. But depending on how you put the camera in the shot, you may lose one or the other. So we just chose to have one flat desk that they both sit behind, and it is also less animation to do, that you don't, when you don't have to see the legs of one of the characters. And Mr. Lunt is the techno-gourd of the future. So we wanted to give him, you know, his Lunt look, but give him something that made him look a little bit space age. So we've got, you know, he's got this little visor thing that goes on kind of like Star Trek.
Really enjoyed getting the Ventrilomatic and Rusty back in the show. Been working with Mike Sanderson, who's been doing the majority of that animation, and you know, just getting the right amount of, you know, stilted mechanical movement out of the Ventrilomatic, and then that sort of, you know, floppy vaudevillian kind of presentation that Rusty gives out. That you know, it's a nice contrast, and it really does require two different approaches when you're animating the two of those. Ventrilomatic is just kind of that B-movie invading alien robot that, you know, silence humans. Of course, there's a lot of a lot of effects and you know, digital things put on both of their voices, and then Rusty is just kind of that you know, Vegas announcer guy. All right, next up, blah blah blah. And I don't know, the opposition makes them both stand out pretty well, distinctly.
Ron Smith, who is actually the director of Penguins, has taken on all the Bob and Larry animation and has done just a fantastic job. He was a senior animator here before he was directing on Penguins. And so he's really having a great time getting back in there and animating as well.
I've been working mainly on the Bob and Larry characters, all the in-between stuff, which is a lot of fun because, you know, as usual, Bob gets all ticked off at Larry, who's trying to do something great, and kind of the wheels start to come off. But it all turns out nice in the end. The audio that Phil and Mike provide are the main guideline, and it directs itself. You know, it's very implicit what he's going through, and it's our job to just kind of capture that as best we can. It's kind of the hardest part to animate too, is when you don't have that audio dialogue to rely on for timing of motions, because you can gesture along with a character saying something pretty easily, but if he's just sitting there and fuming, and I just got done with a bit where Larry's trying to, you know, interrupt Bob, but he's, you know, doing that not quite saying anything. And it's just trickier not having the audio to rely on with that. We do a lot of looking in the mirror at ourselves and practicing expressions and, you know, playing the audio over and over again and, you know, acting out different things. And usually you'll work on something through the day and then you'll come back the next morning and look at it again with fresh eyes and find a lot of little things that you can improve upon. But that's kind of where the vicious circle starts, where you go, oh, I can make this better. Oh, no, I can make this better. Sometimes you just need to, you know, abandon it the way it is and move on. But yeah, it's a lot of fun just, you know, planning out those little glances, and if they're not, you know, at the right time, you can kind of tell, you know, it's like, oh, he's reacting too early to something right here, or he would do that gesture a little more abruptly, and maybe even Larry flinches because he does that. So there's a lot of interaction between the two characters that's really important to get across. They're basically talking heads. They don't have their hands to wave around and gesture with, so yeah, the eyes, windows to the soul, and that's what we have to rely on is that expression.
The story, it was, you know, just seemed almost too obvious to not have thought of before, but retelling the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors as a Western.
With both Phil and I, we were both huge fans of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical.
We had a guy named Bob Lee who did the writing for this show.
We had to decide, what is the lesson in Little Joe? You know, is it perseverance? Is it faithfulness? You know, what is it? And you realize it's mostly faithfulness, and that's what we tried to focus for Bob as he was writing it, because he was writing really, really funny stuff. But it's always the teaching side of a script that you try to infuse in there. It's a little more difficult.
Phil took a day, polished it, did a few things to it, and we came out with a really good script.
It made me laugh.
The story of Joseph in the Bible is Joseph's brothers end up putting him in a pit and selling him to some desperados. And he goes to Egypt, which in our case is Dodgeball City. He is basically sold to this keeper of this pizza place, Dodgeball City's pizza place, which is McPotiphar. In the Bible story, of course, he's sold into Potiphar's house and gets into trouble with Potiphar's wife. And so we set up the same sort of a similar tension or a problem for Joseph in the pizza place between he and this kitty.
She sets him up, just like Potiphar's wife in the Bible set up Joseph. And as Joseph ended up in jail, so does Little Joe end up in the county jail.
In jail, our hero, our Little Joe, interprets the dreams of the baker and the blacksmith. And in the Bible, that's almost exactly like the Bible story where he interprets the dreams of two prisoners that he's in prison with. One of them being a servant to Pharaoh. And that servant to Pharaoh ends up getting out of jail and going back and serving in Pharaoh's house. So we follow very similar to the Bible story there. The mayor is the same as the Pharaoh character in the Bible, and he interprets the dream of the mayor and shows how to save the city, which is just what Joseph did for Pharaoh. He showed them how to save the country. In the Bible story, ultimately, Joseph didn't just save the country, but wound up saving his own family who were starving in Israel and came to Egypt and would be able to have food. And we do the same thing with ours.
We had to take some differences. We wanted to make it feel Western, like when Joseph has his dream at the beginning. In the Bible, you remember he dreamed that there were bundles of wheat that were all bowing down to him. And we thought, you know, that doesn't sound very Western. You know, we got to choose Western things. We got, you know, armadillos, we got horseshoes, we got cactuses. We'll have him dream about cactuses. So that's why his dream was about cactuses. Now, when the mayor has his dream, you know, in the Bible, Pharaoh had the dream about the 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows. And we thought about that for a while, and you can't get much more Western than that.
When we're designing a character or a prop or location, we start off very realistic. And then we start to veggyize things. So there are no perfect 90-degree angles. There's no straight lines. Everything's a little cockeyed. And if we're working on a location or a set design, there are no straight lines. It's like creating a perfect set and then twisting it and bending it and melting a part of it and pushing a part up and pushing another part down, and then that's our veggie whirl.
It seems like another little gem. It's like a classic VeggieTales story. And we'd never done a Western, and Larry looks great in a cowboy hat.
Maybe I know your eyes see right through my disguise, and no one can deny.
I wanted to do a boy band, song. I didn't start off being a boy band song. The lyrical hook that just came to me as I was thinking about this was, baby, I know your eyes see right through my disguise, and I wrote that down, and I just looked at it and thought, that's just really cheesy, and it just hit me as, that's so boy band. And so I thought it would be great, to take that and throw it into a boy band concept. And so we start off with, and it's so different from any other kind of silly song that we've done before. And so I think for it to really work, we had to do it like a polished MTV piece.
So one of the first things I did was got in touch with our babysitter, Kayleen, and borrowed all of her boy band CDs. So I had 98 Degrees and NSYNC, and I was listening to the styles. What sounds do they use? How does it just scream boy band from the start to the end? And then, of course, my inspiration was Joey here. Picked him up, and I got a matching Joey for Mike, so we can both be inspired as we're writing.
No belly button.
About 1998, I was talking with a guy named John Duckworth, and we were kicking around ideas for shows. And they were all pretty good, but there was one that caught my eye, and it was an Easter carol. And it was just a couple of lines, but it said Ebenezer Nezer, runs a factory making plastic Easter eggs, but his perception of Easter is as hollow as the empty plastic eggs that come out of his factory. And that was, about it. And he thought that Bob the Tomato could be Bob Cratchit, and, Junior could be Tiny Tim.
And God blessed us, everyone.
But the problem has always been, how do you take something that's so well known as A Christmas Carol and make it new and exciting? How do you put your own spin on it, but yet remain true to the original source material? Because the Christmas Carol is a beautiful piece of literature. It's very faith-based.
I was amazed with how powerful it was. I had tears in my eyes by the end of it, just seeing the redemption of this man's life.
I've seen what life would be like without the hope of Easter, and believe me, you don't want to go there.
One of the things about telling the Easter story was the whole idea of telling the story of Jesus, because early on we made the decision not to portray Jesus as a vegetable.
So how do we tell the story of Easter if we can't portray Jesus as a vegetable, which was VeggieTales rule number 1 from the very beginning? And so, way back in, it was late 97 or early 98, we had a brainstorming session, and we were just throwing around ideas, and somebody threw out, what if we tell the story through stained glass windows? I remember going home that day thinking, we just solved the puzzle. So once we settled on an Easter carol, is we're going to tell the Easter story, in the setting of Dickens' London. Then all of a sudden light bulbs went on, and we said, well, then we can do a new Christmas special too. And since we have to build London once, we can do both of these, really create these two stories together to bookend each other, the beginning of the story with Christmas and the end of the story with Easter, using the same characters in the same settings, and it becomes, really a two-part story that should be taken together.
There's a story that started on Christmas, when a baby was born in the night.
We were in the middle of Jonah and developing the Christmas show and Easter Carol at the same time.
Well, actually, Easter the script had been around a long time, way before the Star of Christmas.
So it was interesting trying to change the original concept for Easter, the Easter Carol, that is, to fit in with the Star of Christmas. Because originally, Bob and Larry were going to have a different role in the Easter Carol. Bob was running this whole huge factory by himself originally, and then since we had partnered them in, as the writing duo in the Star of Christmas, we decided to let them both work in the factory together, and which is great because they make a great team.
It actually was in production during parts of Jonah. We I jokingly call it, we were making it under the belly of the whale. I think probably the Easter show had more animators working on it than any other show that VeggieTales has ever made, including Jonah.
What?
In a nutshell, You know, there would be guys that did the first layout on the shot, so we determine all the camera angles, you know, how we're going to view that shot so we can plan it. And then the animators will animate the characters and the bucket that they're in, for instance, and things like that. And then we turn it over to the effects guys, and the effects guys will go through that shot and add the explosions, the fire, the brick material flying out in every direction, and just put that all together.
Oh, we made it!
When we came up with the idea to tell the Easter story through the stained glass windows, it occurred to me that the best way to do it, rather than just with a dry narrator, would be to do it in song. Then that song became vitally important. You know, if the song was really going to tell the story within the story, that was the reason for the whole thing, it needed to be more than just me, you know, Mr. Lunt warbling away. We had also settled on the idea of a music box angel. You know, this little angel character that would come to life out of a music box and be the visitor.
We wanted to have Rebecca St. James do Hope in this show, and that was kind of a concept that occurred early on.
Ding, 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 give the man a prize.
I've recorded a few little animation pieces, but nothing like VeggieTales. And so when I heard through our office in Nashville that Phil and the gang at VeggieTales were interested in me being involved in a role, I was so excited.
Come on, let's get going. We've got some ground to cover.
One of the things that I like about her is her feistiness. She's just really, I mean, she's got attitude, probably a little more attitude than I have in real life, but I can be feisty. But she also is, I think, sensitive. You know, Neza at a few points is really vulnerable, and she's gentle with him.
She was just so wonderful to work with and so enthusiastic about doing the show. And then when we went into the recording session, she just really did a marvelous job, and it came out wonderfully.
Oh, you're not a miser or a Scrooge or anything like that. You just don't see what's right in front of you. I'm used to being in the studio doing music, but not so much, you know, doing voiceovers for angels. So it's a very new experience, but very exciting experience.
Your
worst nightmare. Oh, I've always wanted to say that.
You're the visitor.
Ding, 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 give the man a prize. Perhaps you aren't as dense as they say.
Because we were setting this in England, and she's an Australian performer, she could do the accent without having to fake it.
I could really rely a lot on my Australian heritage and Australian accent, but I really had to kind of pull out a lot of British accent as well, and it was very fun because it's really going back to my roots. There's a line in the movie where I tell Neza that he's a first-class stinker, and I really love that because I can pull out the English-Australian accent and just kind of get really feisty with it, so that's my favorite line.
Rebecca is very intuitive in delivering emotion with her songs. That was the way I communicated with her, not to try to tell her exactly how to say something, but what emotion she needed to convey. This is the heartfelt moment between you and Nezer.
Okay.
Take it when you're ready.
It is really fun being another character and really trying to pull out, you know, of your own experience and then of other voices that you've heard what that character needs to be. It's a very fascinating process.
They're talking about the hope of Easter. The hope of Easter changes everything.
It's a very, just a very intimate Christian message. And so it's actually a little special to everybody that worked on the show.
Easter is the story that's closest to my heart that I've done since I've been a Big Idea. I think just because it's so incredibly deep in its faith orientation. It was a very careful line to tread because we've got vegetables speaking about something that we hold as eternal truths, and you have to balance the silly and the sacred, but I think we pulled it off. I really do.
A lot of shots, if we had to put all of the details in the shot, they'd be way too complex and difficult to make. So we have to figure out ways to do those shots more simply. And the case in point would be a good example of that would be where they're in the bucket, you know, and they're spinning, you know, there's lots of excitement, the egg is getting close, the needle's getting right up to the edge, you know, and you see the factory just spinning around them. Well, in fact, actually, when we animate that shot, you know, the characters aren't spinning at all, they're sitting there. It'd be way too complex to spin the bucket, to spin them in the factory and animate the characters inside that bucket all at the same time. It can be done, but it's more difficult than you need to. So what we would do is fool the eye, and that would be the characters are sitting there being animated in the bucket without really moving, and then we composite in a spinning, the factory spinning around behind them. It's on basically like a wheel, a carousel, if you will, that's put over the top of them, and it is spun, but it's spun simply, and so then it renders together and looks really nice. Most of our veggie characters are pretty well established. We know what they look like, and all we do in concept really is add the costumes to them. But in the case of Easter, we had a brand new character, Hope. She had arms, and she had a little skirt-like dress that was part of the egg that she comes out of. So it's a very unusual character, very different from the normal veggie. And so we went through quite a process of drawing and redrawing sketches until we got the look that we wanted. But it's frequently not enough to just have the sketches. When you go to model a character, build it in CG, it's very helpful to have a maquette. And a maquette really is just a sculpture. It's a clay sculpture of the character, so that the artist doing the modeling in the computer can look at it from any direction, and if they're having trouble getting the hair just right, or the hands, or part of the facial detail, sometimes that is easy to translate out of a drawing, and sometimes it's not. So when you build a maquette, they're able to take that, look at it, and keep working an area on their computer until they get it just right. So we decided on Hope, I wanted to do a maquette. I knew a guy that I trusted that would do a really good job at making a maquette, and I'm not sure whether I got what I wanted or not, but at least I got something.
Late one night, actually, my wife went out shopping with her sister, and I had my digital 8 camera in my office, and I set it up on a tripod, on my desk, and sort of turned the viewfinder toward me so I could, see what I was doing. And I had Funky Town, on CD, so I just, pressed that and, danced like a mad fool, just, getting specific shots, and then I digitized all that and edited it.
We never had hands before, and every time we drew the characters, we kept drawing them with hands. And hands are so important to get the emotion. And to look at our VeggieTale designs and our VeggieTale animation prior to Snoodle without the hands, it's just really a testament to the quality of our animators and how much they love their jobs to be able to put that much emotion into a character without hands. Just as I'm sitting here, I'm talking with my hands. Now, when you look at the design of our hands, because they don't have anything that attaches the hand, like I got an arm, they don't have arms, they just have hands. So it doesn't really attach to their body. So you'll see in most of the shots, their hands are very close to their body. If they're out, it looks really weird, and it just breaks the whole emotion and the idea of it. It's just like, oh my goodness, he doesn't have an arm. So we always have the hands very close to the body, and it just helps with the illusion of that.
Little trivia question. I called him Snoodle Doo, though it's never referenced in the story, and he's never called, hey, Doo. We needed a point of reference during production when we were referred to him, so I just thought, let's just call him Snoodle Doo.
Dr. Jiggle and Mr. Sly had several different iterations. The first actually was a lesson in paying attention, and it was named Drop Your Pickle and Missed Your Fries. It was something just ridiculous like that. Jimmy Gord was working in, like a McDonald's type restaurant in Victorian England. Basically he was this employee who wouldn't pay attention. So then the title Dr. Jiggle and Mr. Sly I thought up that first as a lesson in self-control where, you know, Jimmy gets dressed up like this Mr. Sly and he goes out and he starts dancing and he starts, you know, hipping people and people go flying all over the place. In the end, we decided to make it a lesson just about self-acceptance. You know, God makes us all special and unique, and we can accept that about ourselves and be who we are because we know God made us special.
When you know God made you special, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You can just be yourself.
For rough score, to sort of set up the mood for Dr. Jiggle as we push into the gate, you know, or to the door. And in the book, Dr. Jekyll, you know, that alleyway door is sort of a, you know, is a character in and of itself. The book talks about that door, and so, you know, I wanted to use that in Dr. Jiggle as a central point as we push into that door. And I used for Rough Track the soundtrack to Vertigo to kind of give it a mysterious, scary kind of a feel. And then the door opens, you know, creaks open, and then out pops this guy wearing a leisure suit, you know, and it's just funny, kind of leading up to the edge of scary and then breaking it with, you know, just something that's just really goofy.
Yeah, there's an element of scariness or spookiness in it, but we tried whenever it got a little too spooky, we'd have a little fun at the end of a cue like that and throw in just a few little, you know, pizzicato strings or eye blinks that just tell people, you know, don't worry, it's lighthearted. We're just having fun with this.
A lot of times on silly songs, I'll get like a little piece, you know, and I won't know what to do with it for the longest time, and that's what happened with SUV Song. I just had this little ditty, because I've always driven an SUV of some sort. I mean, I had a Jeep Wrangler, you know, that was after my Ford Fiesta, which was my very first car, that one actually showed up. My Ford Fiesta showed up in the Cheeseburger song. That was my red Ford Fiesta in there. And then my next car after that was a Jeep Wrangler.
Is it a Jeep?
A Subaru.
And I kind of wanted to make it about sort of the ridiculousness of, you know, having one of these things in the city or in the suburbs, because I really never needed it for anything like that. I remember I took it camping one year, and on purpose I, you know, went back into the, you know, kind of the off-roading it, you know, and there was a big crater, you know, big holes in the ground and stuff like that. That's kind of where the line came from. And if we go camping and find a Ranger stuck in a ditch, because I actually got myself stuck, I almost got myself stuck in a ditch at 1 o'clock in the morning, you know, camping, you know, trying to, you know, try out my SUV. So I sort of realized the whole ridiculousness of that, and I wanted to write a song about it, but I just had this little piece and I didn't know what else to do with it, and I kind of figured I'd love to do it as a duet.
Then we could be the heroes.
Oh, we could be the heroes.
We started with a Broadway version of the song, which that's how the song starts. And I kept hearing like this power ballad, power guitars, big rock, you know, 70s rock sound. So I kept bringing that element into it, and it was a lot of fun to see how it transpired then, because it, you know, after that first chord, it drops back into this light Broadway feel and intimate, and then it just opens way up again. Adam Frick did a just fantastic job on the guitars and the drums and the bass and all those elements, and then I brought in all the orchestral elements and finished writing it out after that.
We'll slam into four-wheel drive for a scoop of rocky road.
Shar Jackson first did the voice of Miss Ackmetha in Esther. You know, she sang the puppy song, and, you know, she's just hilarious. And so I thought that would be the perfect character for Larry to sing a love song with. We called Shar, and she was really thrilled about doing it, so she came in and just nailed it. I mean, you know, I couldn't have asked for anything better. And especially when they start, you know, going into the hero chorus, I mean, she could just really, you know, belt out those just hilarious notes.
I remember coaching her to sing it worse, because she's really a pretty good singer, and all that high stuff, she was actually singing it pretty well, and he said, no, we got to have it so you just gonna, ugh, you cringe when you get to that top note.
And now, a Snoodle's Tale.
The Snoodle's Tale is, for me, a really special story. I had this picture in my head of this little parable that I wanted to craft in this little world. And the goal was not just, how would Phil tell that story, but the goal was, how would Dr. Seuss tell that story? And so I locked myself away and just worked on the verse and worked on the rhymes and tried to get the emotion of that metaphor, into this really fun verse. And it was late one night and my wife had just gone to bed, so I came downstairs and said, and she wasn't asleep yet, I said, honey, can I read you a story? And sat down on the bed next to her and just read her through this, like 40 stanza poem that I just finished. And by the time I got to the end of it, I set it down and turned to her to see if she liked it, and she had tears streaming down both of her cheeks.
This little movie has a powerful message that's really addressed to all of us. And it impacts all of us. And it's a message that's very freeing, and it's a message that says how uniquely made we are in God's eyes, how much He loves us, and that our self-identity truly only comes from Him alone.
Far, far away in the land of galoots, where the bigglebag trees bear their bigglebag fruits, and far lily bushes all blossom in yellow, and thimbuttle plants squirt snowberry jello.
As I began to study the script, what visually came to mind right away was color. The first sensation that I wanted to throw at the audience was a sensation of, wow, this is a wonderful place. It's like a candy land. And then as the story evolved, we wanted those colors to grow even stronger until he reached a point into the middle of the story where our main character really had to make a decision. And at that point, we really muted the colors and took it back to be a little bit more of a gray, a little bit more monotone. And then as we got up into the third part of the story, where he actually meets up with the creator, we created more of a palette that's warm.
The establishing shot of the town square is painted, and that was actually the first drawing that I did for the whole show, or anybody did for the whole show. So once we knew that the tower looked like that, the buildings all around the tower looked a certain way, then everything else was designed to fit around that world. We got into such an organic design for the visual development of it. As I was drawing and painting some of the color keys and handing them off to other artists like Chuck Vollmer and Joe Spataford, we started to realize that this show was going to be heavily painted. Just about every background you see, all the clouds are painted. Whenever you see ground that goes in the background, like hills, or if you see crops, the yellow crops that you see in the background, that's all painted as well. And that's all done digitally using Photoshop and Painter.
Obviously, the score is 70% of conveying the emotion when you actually start putting the music behind what you're seeing visually. And I wanted first to kind of portray just, again, this happy, safe place. It's fun to be. I kind of sensed the kind of instrumentation you might actually have at a circus. And when he went on to his journey, I wanted to emotionally start to portray a little bit more of threatening type music. Until he met up with his God character, I wanted the music at that point to become more orchestrated. The temp score is extremely helpful to the music director, and it's helpful to everybody along the pipeline of production. If you just went through an entire production without the music, without some kind of temporary music in that holding place, you're really missing out on emotionally what's going on there story-wise, and you're not conveying to all the production people who are involved as well what's happening emotionally, which can really affect their work and how it impacts what they're contributing to the story.
Mark Volcano did a great job of setting it up and had given me some musical ideas to get inspired by that really helped out. It's a cute little endearing story, but it's really rich with emotion. So we're jumping back and forth between this lighthearted music and this sadder music. I used a lot of simpler instruments like flute and melodica. And then we have the characters of the community that come around him, and they bring a flavor of a little bit of meanness and a little bit of raucousness in them, with this band that sounds like a calliope or a circus band, a little bit out of tune, a little bit out of rhythm. And then he climbs the mountain, and first there's a mystery to that. There's a loneliness, there's a silence up there, but then he meets the Creator, and there's a sense of peace. And so as he's coming back down the mountain, the orchestra is a little bit bigger. It's a little more joyous, a little happier.
In looking for the voice for our main character. We went through 6 or 7 different children, and Philip's voice right away I thought had that sound, had that unique innocence about it. Also the enthusiasm that Philip has in his personality came through right away.
When I first found out that I was going to voice a character, that I was really excited.
I would say, okay, pretend you're on the playground right now and you just got pushed off the slide. Think about how that feels. Can you think of a situation like that? Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, here's the line of dialogue.
They just told me what to say, and I just repeated that, and they told me how to do the tone of my voice.
And he did a great job for that being his first time at doing a professional dialogue recording.
I think the message is important. It's not what other people think of you, it's only the way that God sees you that matters.
Kids come into the world and they want to do everything, and they think they can do everything because no one has told them they can't. You know, so your kids, they'll sing for you, they'll make pictures for you, they'll do cartwheels for you. But then as they grow, eventually peers come into the picture. And when peers come into the picture, the messages change. And so what I wanted to do with this story was, number one, create a parable. So we can step out of our own world and look into another little world and see that dynamic. But ultimately, and this is the lesson that I'm trying to get across, we can't draw our self-image from our peers. We need to draw it from our Creator. Because only when you see yourself the way God sees you do you have a true picture. And that is so freeing, that's how you can sing, that's how you can dance, that's how you can soar. Our culture has decided that the best message they can give kids is to be true to yourself, is to follow your heart, and you are who you think you are. Many of us think we're miserable people. So ultimately that message may not get you very far. But when you can get outside that message and say, no, you are who God thinks you are, and then when you realize, when you look to the Bible and say, wow, that's what God thinks of me, He thinks I'm so incredibly special that I was worth dying for, and that's really, this whole tale is a metaphor for that, for the incredible worth that is bestowed on us by a loving God, and how if kids see that, you can face life with hope and a much, much sunnier disposition. You can find joy, not through the approval of your peers, but through knowing where you stand and how you're viewed by your Creator, and it's a very powerful lesson.
Sumo of the Opera is a great show about perseverance. We sort of live this kind of prophetic life here. It's like we have to tell stories, and when we start to tell stories, it seems like we inevitably go through the circumstances that are in the stories. And, so this story, we wanted to do a show on perseverance. And of course, this show, Sumo of the Opera, went through a lot of the company's most difficult periods of time and lots of change and transition. And so it just seemed like every once in a while through the making of the show, we'd look at each other and like, well, we've got to keep on keeping on, because that's what this show's about, and we're going to live it all the way to the end. The production portions of the show was done in a little bit less than 2 months, which is incredibly fast. Previously, the most animators that have ever worked on a VeggieTale was the Easter Carol, when we had 19 animators working on it, which was more animators than actually worked on the feature film Jonah. This one kind of even shattered that record, and Sumo had 26 animators working on it.
If you want to know who we are wrestlers of Japan.
Sumo was a challenge, but it was a fun, rewarding challenge. We covered so much musical ground in there, but that's one of the things I love about getting to write these sorts of shows. I wrote Irish music, German music, Japanese music, traditional orchestral scoring, ragtime, 80s rock and roll.
When I was writing the countertop for Sumo, it was just after Christmas, and my wife and I had bought our daughter a little puppet theater. We'd go down at night and she'd give us little puppet shows, with these little finger puppets that we got. And I just loved that idea, and so I thought, when we started working through how the theme of perseverance would play out and how we would structure the countertop, it worked really well for Larry to be away actually having this phone conversation with Bob about, trying to go to this kids event. We thought it'd be great for, somebody to stand in for Larry. So we, came up with this finger puppet or hand puppet that Khalil would do the voice for, because I love Khalil's voice, and Tim Hodge just does such a great job with it. Going Up was about, taking this piano up a giant hill. And Todd Carter and I worked on that. It was a silent film, really. There was no dialogue in the whole thing. So Todd did a lot of work just developing the story as a visual story. We had talked about the Laurel and Hardy episode where they actually took a piano up a hill and delivered it. And we wanted to kind of put a little bit of a twist on that and actually turn that into the Three Stooges.
And it was an interesting segment to do all the way through animation, because everybody's like, are we going to be able to pull this off? We storyboarded it, we believed in it, but it's like, it's still silent. We're wondering, is it going to pay off? Is it going to play? And we got all the way through animation. We're still looking at that. We were looking at the animation looks great, the lighting looks great, it's all beautiful, but we're still going, is this really going to work? And then we put Kurt's music to it and the sound effects, and we all looked at it and just went, yeah, it works really well.
And then in the Going Up segment, we had the ragtime piano. I'd enhance that with some drums and some bass. But then we needed a different element for whenever we saw the words on the screen. The piano must go up. So I took, kind of reminiscent of Peanuts, Charlie Brown's teacher, I took my trumpet and my trombone and used a mute, wah, 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 wah. The piano must go up.
I had actually been reading a series of books on church history. Before I started reading these books, there was just so much about church history that I didn't know. So for me, I was really excited about a lot of the stories I was reading, and thought it'd be a really good opportunity to tell one of those stories, the story of St. Patrick, who really was the first missionary. He was the first person to take the gospel outside of what was thought to be the civilized world, outside of the Roman Empire. We just wanted to do that in a very silly sort of, VeggieTales way, or in kind of a fractured fairy tale almost sort of fashion.
When we decided that we wanted to do the story of St. Patrick, we looked at our options, and first of all, we didn't want to turn him into a vegetable, but the idea of doing him as a human in 3D wasn't real appealing either, because that's actually a really difficult thing to do, and it usually doesn't turn out so well. That's why a lot of times you'll see in 3D, people do toys, or they do fish, or insects, because those things really translate well into 3D. So in deciding that we didn't want to do him as a vegetable and we didn't want to do it as a human in 3D, that's how we kind of stumbled onto this idea of doing it as this new style. With two-dimensional traditional animation, you take lots of different drawings and you put them all together, and it creates the illusion of movement. And then with three-dimensional animation, like VeggieTales, you've got characters that you don't have to redraw every time. You just kind of move them around the screen and the computer figures out what happens in between. This show was kind of a combination of both. Using the program called After Effects, the computer is actually able to take these few drawings that we did. We would do pieces of artwork for each character, and then I would be able to move them around.
St. Patrick, we had, I think, about 3 different locations, 3 different countries. What we wanted to do is we wanted to create for each individual location a different color palette, a different look entirely. For Ireland, everything is influenced by green. When you go to Britain, everything is influenced by the colors of the British flag. Then you go to France, and for some reason France is blue.
This is simply a metaphor.
I had sat down to write a song, and I had no idea where I was going with it, but the hook that came into my mind was weather, 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 whether you like it or not, weather, 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 weather is cold, warm, and hot. And I loved the sound of that, and then from there, once that hook entered my mind, I just thought, it's just a really fun, it'd be really fun to take that and turn it into kind of a fun grammar lesson.
I'm a pronoun, they're a pronoun, he's a pronoun, she's a pronoun. Wouldn't you like to be a pronoun too?
Then the main segment on the show is, of course, Sumo of the Opera, which is our Rocky parody.
The first time I read the Sumo script, I was just like, this could be a really interesting show. This could be a really fun show. So I got really excited about it. I had just gone from working on, Snoodle show. So I'm thinking Dr. Seuss, and I get thrown from this kind of crazy, whimsical Snoodle world into like the Japanese culture. This is one of the pieces of concept art that I worked on. This is the tiger bike. And the script says, okay, the tiger bike is the thing that everybody's after. It's supposed to be the big incentive for winning this whole thing. And
I'm like, well, it's got to look really cool. I actually thought, well, it'd be really cool if the wheels were like, you know, held on like by paws, and the entire bike was an actual tiger and had a big tail that kind of went out the back. I'm like, that's something I'd want to ride.
A tiger bike.
With Sumo at first, I wasn't sure musically what direction I wanted to go. The traditional Gilbert and Sullivan musical used a standard orchestra. Ironically, they didn't use any Japanese Oriental sounding instruments in their orchestration, but we wanted to bring that element in. So I started with a traditional orchestra and then just pulled together all these different Japanese and Oriental instruments, lots of bells and chimes and wood blocks and stringed instruments, so we definitely get a feel of the Orient.
I've got to keep my eye on the tiger.
It was fun to tip our hat to some of the old classic movies that deal with sports and training and preparing for a fight, and whatever that is, whether it's Karate Kid or Rocky or you name it. Every movie like that has to break into a musical montage as the character is getting ready for something and they're preparing. So we did the same thing with that and brought in some 80s rock and roll, that style, to just give it a classic feel and reminiscent to us adults.
The company is a lot smaller. We do a lot more now with a lot fewer people. But the people that are here and that are working now are some of the finest people I know, and they work so incredibly hard to make these shows, you know, touching, beautiful, meaningful, and funny. It warms my heart to work with them because they care so much about getting the story across and making sure that, you know, that it's as good as it can possibly be, as funny as it can be, entertaining, and yet really get a message across.
Well, we decided to give Larry, you know, a poofy hairdo and eyeglasses. We wanted him to look very teacherly, and a friend of mine named Hans, who's actually a music teacher, sort of was the inspiration behind Larry's look. And so I don't think I've told Hans that yet, so I think I'll probably need to mention that to him. But yeah, we just thought it'd be kind of fun to have him kind of come out looking like a teacher. And in my mind, Hans is the teacher. You know, he's the typical teacher, and so that's why we went that route with Larry. All of the bus routes that Larry takes are actual Chicago City Street bus routes. So so if you actually listen to all those and go get a CTA map, you know, Chicago Transportation Authority map, you know, you can find your way to a neighborhood. So it's pretty funny.
If you look where Maywin pushes the cradle off screen, you can see a little square of pink behind him when he moves to the side. That's actually his neck, because I'd forgotten to attach his neck to his body. So when he moves, you actually see that behind him, which hopefully most people won't notice, but it's there. One of my favorite shots in the whole segment is the shot of St. Patrick preaching, and there's, in the first part, there's only a few people standing around, and the camera begins to pull out, and it cross dissolves from the hills to a town to a field with a wall. And as the camera pulls back and as we go from one place to another, you see that St. Patrick's crowd is actually building and more people are hearing his message of God's love. I think that's a really effective visual way to communicate how we can tell people about God. But it turns out it's also kind of a joke in there too, because each of those people that's standing around Patrick, as they gather around, those are all people that work here at Big Idea. We've got our concept artists, and then Tim Hodge and Mike Naraki, who are our directors, and I'm in there. I'm the blonde guy down in the front. And Andy Yowsey, who's our production coordinator, he's actually over there on the side, leaning on the stick. And the tall, skinny guy who's up in the corner with the dark hair, that's actually Mike Naraki. He was the director of St. Patrick and the whole Sumo show, but he's also the voice of Larry the Cucumber.